podcast,
podcast,
right? 'Cause,
yeah.
you know, it gives you an occasion to sit down and have a conversation.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, that's good, that's good.
Yeah. Which is this sort of strange phenomenon because it's like a relationship that has an audience.
Right,
The whole
right.
relationship isn't.
Yeah, exactly. I chew Nicorette gum obsessively, so at some point I will be taking gum in and out of my mouth. I apologize now. You can edit that out or not.
No, we'll leave that in there.
Right.
Yeah. Are we running?
We're running.
Okay, good.
Okay,
good.
so tell
We
me a
won't
little
miss
bit
anything.
about the exhibition, the construction of it, and like knowing you part of it. My question is, where's the wood from? But then also tell me about the chair, which is really comfortable, by the way.
Oh, good. Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like it wouldn't be when you sit down.
Yeah, I agree.
And it is. But if you're the right height, if you're too tall, then you get
Right.
something in your back.
Yeah. Alas, I am not too tall. No.
Let's see. Well, so this show, there are the two outdoor huts.
Mm-hmm.
Heidegger over there, Wittgenstein over there.
Yeah.
Maybe we can walk around them quick later.
Yeah.
And then this is Adorno, which
Mm-hmm.
isn't, he didn't have an actual hut. He had
Right.
a hut dedicated to him by a poet. So there's a little bit more
Yeah.
leeway as to how to do
And
it.
so the materials for the different huts, where were they coming from?
Two fences,
Mm-hmm.
so it's cedar wood.
Okay.
And one is, there's some bit of pine that came off of, I think it's trim on an old
Okay.
house.
Okay.
And I didn't know exactly which house, but the other two fences I took down myself and then brought the wood over
All right.
and
All right.
put them back up.
As you know, I'm thinking hard about reassemblage these days. So,
Okay, yeah.
anytime I
Yeah.
see something that appears to be reassembled, I mean, I think of everything as always being reassembled, but then
Yeah.
there are some things which more dramatically have been reassembled.
Yeah, they're more obvious about the
Yeah,
tactics.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have I sent you my essay yet?
No,
Okay, I'll send it to you.
no. But
I talk about you a little bit.
I'm excited to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited that it's finished.
It's finished. So
Yeah, it's finished. It's not. It will, I think, appear in December in Critical Inquiry.
Okay. Yeah.
Currently in Image Permissions Nightmare, the way
Yeah.
one typically is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can get a Dubuffet image, but only for 5 years. But if something is online, that actually means you have to get it in perpetuity. But
Oh.
you can't get it in perpetuity, so what do you do? It's complicated.
Well, maybe they're going to come up with some Snapchat version where the image disappears.
Right.
after something like that.
Well, I suggested something
Yeah.
like that. It's like, can
Yeah.
we make the images disappear?
Or it turns into a link.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, that's drag.
All right, so then tell me about the rocker.
So the rocker is made up of, has some public school material in it. So the blue metal is the electrical door panels from
Right.
those electrical boxes that sit out in the yard.
Mhm.
This whole, it's Crispus Attucks, the whole thing was going to get torn down, which
Right.
I don't think has actually happened yet. But and then the rocking, so it's basically clad on top of an existing rocking chair that I found that had been falling
Okay.
apart.
Okay.
So it's just a rocking chair that's been reclothed,
Mhm.
basically.
Mhm.
And a lot of these cubes also, I think of them as sketches in a way, trying to how to get one material, how do you get from here to there?
Yeah.
So the material all has this, some of it has a much more specific provenance than others,
Mhm.
and some of it's just random stuff that's been picked up here and there, or leftovers from other projects.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I like your idea of things get reassembled temporarily. I
Right.
sort of think of it as this morphology where they kind of drift together for a
Right.
moment and then they get.
Right. And then they disassemble
Yeah.
and then they reassemble.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my head has been very much in Deleuze and Guattari.
Mhm.
And so For me, it's always in their patois. This is things territorializing, deterritorializing, re-territorializing, and a lot of assemblage theory has drafted off of Deleuze and Guattari or been inspired by it.
Yeah.
And as I think I said when we were talking before, my irritation with that, or my frustration with it, not really irritation, is that there's no thought given to assemblage as an art practice. You would think.
Yeah.
But assemblage is the translation of agencement. So, configuration, arrangement, something like that.
Yeah.
And so there's no reason why that theory should be thinking about the history of assemblage practice. But, nonetheless, once you have assemblage as your master term, it strikes me that, boy, you might want to be thinking about the material world. I mean, both 20th century history of art, but also like quilting and spolia and scrapbooks and all that kind of thing.
And my familiarity with Deleuze and Guattari is pretty limited, but I have at times used the word rhizomatic when I'm thinking about how one of the ways I've described the school furniture project is that it's like a memorial that has a kind of rhizomatic quality where like mushrooms that pop up here and there all over the place, and the material in a way gets seeded in some other place, and temporarily, I would assume.
That's good. Yes, my figure for this is because I think the rhizomatic or the rhizome is such a powerful figure, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the rhizomatic, as Deleuze and Guattari think about it, is very, very, very powerful. I think I'm also still interested in vertical relations. So, for me, it's also like the deposit. And so, they are against the arboreal, anything that's tree-like, anything that has roots. They also don't know their botany as well as they might have, because rhizomes actually do have a form of root, and there are other tropes they could have used, but that's the one they used, and it's very powerful. But one way that I always think about their work, and have done this with a group of 7 other thinkers and artists, is to take individual examples of theirs and actually start doing some homework, some history. I mean, they make a distinction between the smooth and the striated, and for them, the smooth, their technological model here. Sorry, sounds ridiculous to be saying this, but their technological model is felt on the one side, and what they call fabric tissue on the other, so woven fabric on the other. And so, all things that are good are smooth, right? No top and bottom, no hierarchy, and the minute that you have woven structure, you're introducing, for one thing, structure. So all it makes a certain kind of sense, but they also, in part, don't recognize the way in which they themselves are participating in a sort of romanticization of felt. I mean, you could say it's a weird Heideggerian moment, because it really is about the natural wood fibers just being pressed together versus a different kind of human hand arranging things and stitching them, or putting things on a loom.
Well, I'm interested to hear more about what you mean by the top down and the roots.
Right, and so in this case, it's like, oh yes, felt, and the way felt appears in their book. It's like one example after another, without ever doing the deep dig. So for me, the vertical would be like, oh, let's do some history here and think about felt in the Middle Ages, the way felt is used to cut stars that Jews have to wear during the Nazi era. I mean, let's actually think about lots of associations with felt throughout decades and centuries that make felt seem a little bit denser than they're treated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't have to stick on Deleuze and Guattari necessarily, but part of what the last talk I did, I really focused on attention as a kind of currency, is maybe the most important kind of currency.
Yeah, good for you.
And in a way, this rhizomatic idea seems to suggest that everything is equally important. I mean, I'm sure they that would be a straw man argument, but that there's the up and down, the root means that something chose to go right there for a reason, and that spot is more important than the one next to it. Right. Which which suggests, which is in itself a kind of a hierarchy. So for me, the aspect of making decisions, I would add the caveat that I have no idea how I make decisions at a certain level, but the aspect of making decisions is really important. That's like choosing this thing to go here, and then figuring out how that next thing gets connected to it. And then what's the relationship between those two things? Which a lot of that was
what agency you're granting
away.
them, and what agency you're keeping for yourself, that kind of thing.
And all of that kind of decision making and subjectivity, I think, was tried to scrape away during the modernist moment.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so when you are making, I'm back on fabric and textiles, and one of the great things that Annie Alpers said, I don't remember which essay of hers this is in, is that weaving for her is in part a playful process, but then also in part a willingness to capitulate to the material. To be surprised by the material. And that's not uninteresting for me in relation to something like someone like Heidegger, who at some moments certainly at least pretends to have a decidedly passive attitude towards the world. But I'm interested in knowing more like how you think about materials and letting materials do the deciding, as it were. So it's your decision process, but how much of your decision process is a matter of saying, let me find out what this chair not quite wants to be. That to me is too much consciousness, but what it's provoking me to think of.
Well, actually, I had a couple of materials with me. So, just as an example, right? So this is a piece of a school table, right? And one of the things about the materials is that there's all these different eras. So the early stuff is like solid oak tabletop, solid oak legs. With somewhat complicated joinery, and then it turns into metal leg screwed onto the back of hollow core. So this is cardboard in here with these layers of poplar.
I never knew that there was actually cardboard in there. Whoa.
And so when you tear those apart, you get this kind of beautiful honeycomb pattern. And it's really orange, like the glue is this kind of orange color. So in a way, the material, like when I think one of the aspects of working with so-called found material is that maybe for some reason it calls out to you,
Yeah.
or, so I'll pick it up and I think, oh, I could use this for that. And then the minute I start cutting into it, I start to see other qualities that the material has.
Mm-hmm.
And then those suggest some other kind of relationship to it.
Yeah.
And as is often the case, I end up using it for some other thing than
Mhm.
what I originally had planned. So in a way, I think that's how one way in which the materials really dictate
Yeah.
where it goes from there. But it's
Right.
not as if the materials, that question of materials having agency is always
Yeah.
an interesting one. And have you ever heard that Terence McKenna quote that plants invented humans to move them around?
That's good. That's good. Yeah.
Or something like that.
Right.
So who knows? They might have plans for us.
They might have plans for us, right? Exactly. Yeah, no, and I think I think it's been right now. It's too easy for people to talk about vibrant matter and the agency of the apparently inanimate. I think it was interesting at one moment. Like 2 decades ago, to be thinking those sorts of thoughts. But, I think at this point, it's a matter of recognizing, if you have any, belief that we are living in something called the Anthropocene, it's like, well, okay, so let's recognize that humans are responsible for that. And yes, there are, we shared responsibility with lots of other things, like the coal in the earth, but it's not the coal's fault that we have, the problem with the sky that we have right now.
Yeah.
It's not the oil on the ground's fault.
Yeah.
So to me, we're actually at a moment where thinking a little harder about human agency makes sense again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is that piece of desk from one of the closed schools?
Yeah. So I'm also curious to hear how I've been turning over that, you put language to the thing-object relationship, and that
Right.
divide shows up in a whole bunch of other contexts. I was thinking of it in relation to design, where you're trying to make a thing that is invisible to some degree.
Right.
That's its use makes it not feel like a thing,
right?
Versus the thing that we are called to attend to and pay attention
Right.
to and slow down and spend time with and so forth. And just as really kind of a rough distinctions. Then there's all this stuff in between.
Right.
And things flipping back and forth all the time between being things and being
objects.
And, that it's never a permanent state.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think that's completely true.
Yeah.
I think that's completely true.
And this school material has a strange, like there's the glass that disappears because you drink out of it, and then there's the glass that becomes visible because, Cher drank out of it or whatever.
Right.
And then there's the glass that was found in a tomb, and then there's the glass that becomes important because your best friend gave it to you before you saw him last or whatever.
Right. Or to get back to the schools, then there's also the piece of broken glass on which somebody has written something.
Yeah. Well, that's another object. You're curious. So, one of the things that, so like this is, we'll have to get a close-up of this later, but, so that's, the pull-out part of a teacher's desk.
Sure do, yep. I've used them.
Yeah. So there's a lot of materials that have that kind of just scrolling in there, class of whatever, somebody's name, I love whoever.
Presumably some pornography.
Yeah. And then, so, like one example, one of the projects I did was called Infinite Games, where I invited a bunch of other artists to work with the material in some way. And just as one example, like, this was Karen Reimer, Karen?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So she took a bunch of the markings off of things and then embroidered them into cushions that then went on the chairs.
Great. That's super smart and interesting.
that was one of a set of 8 that she did.
Wonderful.
They were really beautiful.
Wonderful.
So it's, in a way, again, all these different artists found a really wide variety of things about that material to respond to.
Yeah, and the let's say, the human residues. I mean, it's sort of a I don't know, it's a crude way of putting it, but in some sense that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that I get so irritated and disappointed with Heidegger, and it's and that's because there just was no capacity to engage something like that. I mean, it really wasn't.
Yeah.
It was never about. It could be about a useful relationship with an object, but it was never about imagining or touching a history of an object.
Yeah.
And imagining that some sort of thingness inherent in that object that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess I always think of him as, in a way, opening up the, reframing the ontological questions so that it had a relationship dimension to it.
Yes.
Right? And, of course, he did a whole lot more than that, but that being the kind of foundation upon which a lot of artists have built, knowingly or otherwise. Relational aesthetics must in some way come out of that way of thinking, and now social practice where you're there's a overtly social dimension. It's not an implicit one.
Yes, there's a philosopher friend of mine who says, for Heidegger, Dasein, the there being that is human being, is always Mitsein, a with being. I think that's and I think that's true, and I think that the claim that we're thrown into a world of things is lovely and so important. I think that where I get crabby with Heidegger is late in the game when he's talking about the thing, which he works so hard on thinking about from about 1923, and certainly the Freiburg lectures in the middle of the 30s. A really serious wrestle with Kant. And trying to imagine what that, for Kant, ever elusive thing in itself might be, and that those lectures end up being pretty disappointed with the possibility. Then late in the game, or later in the game, 1950, the Dusting lecture that he gives, as I narrate it, and I'm not really a Heideggerian, so my Heideggerian friends would no doubt object, but as I narrate it, you got this great ethnographic scene. It could be from the hut, and you have a potter at a potter's wheel throwing the krug, the jug, the vase, jug, say. Then the potter disappears, there is no wheel, there is just the krug, there's just the jug. And then it's not even the jug, but the inside of the jug, the void within the jug, around which the potter shaped the jug. That ends up being the thing. So and at that moment, the thing that is calling deities and mortals in earth and sky, that makes the thing absolutely foundational, calling other things into being almost. But oh my gosh, now we have a void inside a vessel that is a thing, as opposed to I think much more banal way of understanding things is about thingness being naming a relation. A subject-object relation. So that's where I think, wow, if only Heidegger had at some point returned to the potter's wheel and and the potter, that would have been great.
Yeah. Well, and then once there's the void, it's about the relation between the void and what's it's being used for, and who is in relation
Right.
to the void.
Right.
Putting a flower in it.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, about libation, but at the end, those uses, are all what then mean. Those are the gods. And that's why why the gathering in the end is as powerful as it is, but to my mind also as etherealized and mysticized as it is.
Yeah.
But Heidegger is not really a material culture guy.
Yeah. Right. Right. But would you say that's a part of your crabbiness about Deleuze and Guattari is that there are no gods? I mean, just to make it very.
No, I don't think I would put it that
Correct.
way. I don't think I would put it that way. But I would say that the crabbiness is related to the crabbiness about Heidegger, because in Deleuze and Guattari, I feel as though there's lots of history, but there's very little material history.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't really recognize what wool fiber is and why it contracts with other wool fibers. They don't. I'm not saying that everybody has to know everything.
Yeah.
It just it's an instance where I feel as though they would have more material culture would have helped them, and more material history. There's in the frontispiece for I think the penultimate chapter of that book, they show an image of a quilt. Mm-hmm. They're calling it Crazy in Stripes. They take the image from a book on quilts, America, but they get it all wrong. I mean, describing the quilt, and the source they got it from actually misstated the quilt, and it says it's 1865, but it's actually a Gilded Age quilt, and it's actually quite a fancy piece of work. It's not the rough-hewn thing that they think it is. So it's the I guess the inattentiveness to that kind of detail, to me, is a kind of inattentiveness that concerns me about when I think about Heidegger too. And I do think, of course, like everybody, I think, yes, in the hut, so dedicated to the provincial, and also dedicated to being by oneself with the mountains and the trees. And I think it's it's easier to imagine erasing the potter and the potter's wheel when you're by yourself in the hut, listening to the storms and really trying quite desperately to feel the force of the natural world. But I don't know, but you've obviously taken much from Heidegger, and so I'm not an artist, so I just think about this as a thinker or whatever I am. But as an artist, I presume you poach powerfully.
Oh, absolutely. I'm guilty as charged. I know very little about most things, and that I think in a way, to some degree, it's I kind of deride myself for it at the same time as I feel like I resist information about things at times when I'm working on a project. I tend to bumble my way into talking about a thing that it turns out a whole bunch of people have already talked about, and there's a whole scholarship that's out there about it, and I think, oh wow, I fell on that path. So I think I read philosophy somewhat sparingly when I feel like I need a kick. I treat it kind of like a narcotic. And I think, like my usual thing, I listen to podcasts all day, just sort of mindless banter.
Right.
And music occasionally, but not very often. And I think there's something about, I think in a way, most of the work that I've done for the past 20 years is more or less the same idea, just kind of revisited, renegotiated, or looked at from a different angle.
And what's that idea?
I think it's like a kind of a cat chasing its tail idea, that there's a it's that there's this relationship between people and things, images and things, and the relationship between people and images is such that people are always trying to be something other than what they are. They're chasing an image, and you know, there's a lot of I'm fascinated by Freud's obviously in his work on that, on what sorts of images we chase and why.
Right.
And then you know, the Lacanian idea that the worst thing you can do is actually get what you want.
Right.
I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
And part of so I imagine identity is something like this, like you know, I always use this example of a battery, that a battery works when there are two oppositely charged particles and they're trying to get from one chamber to the other, and then once they equalize, it's no longer a functional, doesn't work as a battery anymore. So part of I mean, I studied painting. I've never studied sculpture officially. I studied painting and furniture making, and so those things are in conversation with each other. And it seems to me the divide between the image and the thing, and sculpture kind of lives, functions in both of those zones, which I think is how I ended up there. But I still. So what's the question? It's like, what's the engine that's making things always want to be something else and change, and moving, and I feel like most of the things I make, it's almost like, you know, grabbing a certain set of things and mashing them together for a minute, and saying, oh, that's a thing now. That's and then, but as soon as I make something, I'm not interested in it anymore.
Right.
On to the next thing. Yeah. And sometimes I'll tear apart the last thing I made and put it into the next. If somebody doesn't take it out of the studio soon enough.
Right. No, it's so interesting. I mean, and I love the way that you're thinking about image and object. And I'm interested when you say, you know, you're gathering a bunch of stuff and, you know, making a thing. Where image might be in that, and fast sidebar, for a while, many years, in fact, my distinguished colleague Tom Mitchell and I had a sort of an ongoing argument, and he would say, "Oh, Bill, you're so interested in objects, but you know, all objects are actually images." Meaning, like phenomenologically, objects come to us as images. And I would say, oh, you know, Tom, actually, you know, all images are objects. I mean, there has to be some material support for any image, you know.
You're both right.
Right, we're both right. We're both right. This happened a long time ago, I think in the 1990s, so it seemed like I was doing great for the first decade of this millennium. It's like, oh, yeah, actually, the objects are doing better now. And you know, finally, not so much attention to image culture, more attention to object culture. But where's the image? Because I'm sure there is, right? I mean, you're clumming stuff together, gathering in your words, and then making a thing. And I'm sure at some moment there is an image or several images or a moving image of something like a before and after.
Well, I think part of the difficulty of that question is I don't feel like I have a good working definition of an image, right? Like I've been writing about that for a few years, trying to figure out what
the image of the image is, right?
Right. The meta image, if there is such a thing. So I guess I think of it more as the thing toward which one is compelled, or something like that. It sounds like a very Heideggerian description, but you know, just in a more mundane sense, yes, I draw and I use photographs at times, or but they're rudimentary. You know, a lot of the well, that's not true. Actually, I'm doing a set of images right now that are like a big banner that are made up of pieces. You know, again, so it's taking close-ups of the cubes and then using that as like a palette, and then that becomes an image. So it's this conversation between the thing and the picture.
Good. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And one of the things I found at the schools was a roll of blueprints. I had like 20 blueprints, and actually this one feels like parchment. This was I was taking notes
blueprints,
for what to talk about, and like blueprints are so interesting because they're like these mediating images between they're an image that describes a thing that will come to exist, but in this case they're images that are describing a thing that once existed and is about to be taken down again. So like, this is the thing that remains.
Good
of those
save.
buildings.
Saving this is so good.
And the idea of a blueprint is like, you know, the thing, you know, they have a kind of Ding an sich quality, like the thing. This is the Platonic recipe for something that's going to emerge in the world.
Right, and this is so serious, you know, compared to yellow trace. You know, I mean, I think of architects working on yellow trace, but then eventually, you know, you get to something as serious as this, which is great. It's a wonderful piece of art at this point now, too. Wow.
I doodle a lot. I think I don't know. I think those. I think the other way in which mushroom seems like an apt metaphor is that there's this constant ruminating and thinking, and then just kind of playing with a set of materials and trying to see what's interesting about them, and then a thing emerges out of that, and that sits out in the world for a while.
Yeah. Well, this is really good. I love the doodles too. Really, really interesting. And do you have a lot of that material, or is this just
well,
that's good.
I do.
So it's now.
I like them in this form too, like little bits. Like when it's a big thing, then I have a tendency to take it too seriously, and it gets stuffy very quickly. And is that particular school gone? No, it's still standing.
Still standing.
I don't know what's become of it since then.
And so I think that the website about that project is so moving. I mean, it's so remarkable when one's looking at these various, student complaints or something like that, drawn on desks or under desks or something like that. And of course, if the schools weren't being closed, that would stay there, and it would stay there, and then it would be thrown out because it's time to get new desks. But in a way, the closing of the school has produced an opportunity for that to be saved, rather than merely thrown out as a kind of record. But it's so moving. It's so moving. And that the school closings seem to have been such a disaster for so many people. And what have you talked to the students, the parents, things like that, from the people who used to be involved in those schools?
Yeah, I have, and I mean, as a my hope with so many of the materials is that they have some educational dimension built
Right.
into them, and you know, using that word very broadly. But I have a couple projects coming up with it that are apprenticeship style projects where I'm going to be working with teens to help produce the things, and having that be a more upfront part of the project. Most of the conversations I've had with kids about the material have been, you know, they have kind of nostalgia
Right.
with it, and they're excited to see it mostly used in some other way. The Beast project was my first real encounter with the students who were familiar with that material, and I mean, there has been some pushbacks, like that some teachers were angry that the material didn't just get transferred to schools that needed it. Because ostensibly all the stuff I got was stuff that was broken or not needed. That's what, I mean, I didn't
That's
make
what
that
you were
decision.
told, yeah. Right.
And whatever I didn't take and put in that warehouse was going to go into the landfill. So, so a lot of the projects that I've been doing, I mean, my ongoing personal relationship with this stuff, but then inviting other people to take it and think about it and work with it. As a way, I think broadly, like to expand or think about what is education, what are the forms it could take, how does the material in a sense inform. But I think that I also think like the idea of a memorial as a productive rather than as a nostalgic or a you know, mourning or traumatic, like all those things can be in it, but having it also serve as having a productive function.
Right, and also if you think of it as something like a kind of inadvertent archaeology, that is, it's not like you were going to X site to dig for Y thing. Rather, there's a bunch of material which one can think of as archaeological. And you know, from my point of view, one aspect of that project that is moving is certainly the specific history, but the other is, you know, the sense that, of course, because we are human beings in the world, we are leaving our residues all over the place all the time, and it is that project, I think, shows the power of focusing archaeologically on those sorts of inscriptions. You know. Which could be, you know, I mean, we could go somewhere else in this building and find such things, no doubt.
Yeah, and even in kind of, you know, there's economies of scale make a certain amount of sense that, like, there are projects that I do where I just need a stack of 4x8 plywood. Right. And I don't want to have to think about each single piece and how I'm going to make that do this thing. Right, but I guess it seems like it's inevitable that some stream of design is going to be largely focused on using things that have already had some other function and having that be the so-called raw material, right? So there's that design question. I think there's I think, you know, there's a way in which I like to think of it too, in the sense of like compost, where, you know, we planted some flowers and now they're wilted, so let's, you know,
turn them into dirt,
throw them back in the pile. I've also been thinking a lot about this. I mean, I don't know how to piece these all together really, but you know, we talked to them about Duchamp and the urinal. And the relationship to plumbing, and this question of waste, and then there's an artist named Wim Delvoye who talks about waste as the most universal thing that unites everybody, and he made this big shit machine that would just shit all day long in a gallery with, and you know, so those, you know, there's a way in which the material that gets thrown out, like, has all of our fingerprints all over
Right,
it, and our
right.
collective identity is sort of
Yeah.
held in there, and how to use that as a starting point for.
Right, and how, you know, so way back when, let's say the 1960s, certainly, and also in the 70s, you had some conceptual artists and some word artists. I think this is a quotation from Lawrence Weiner. It could have been lots of different people saying, there are enough objects in the world, no reason to make another object.
Yeah.
But in relation to that, I feel as though, you know, your point would be, there are lots of objects in the world, and a lot of them are no longer functioning the way they're supposed to be.
Right.
So actually, let's make some new objects in the world, but let's make them from old objects.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, or thinking of it as more like this object was doing this thing, and then it ran out of steam, and
Yeah.
you know, just crank the engine up a little and turn it a
Right.
bit to the right, and it can do that thing.
Yeah,
for a while.
that's right. That's right.
Uh,
And you know, increasingly, I feel as though, you know, this is going to have to be a kind of ethics that gets seriously internalized. I mean,
Yeah.
it is, you know,
Yeah.
it is fundamentally a sort of recycling move.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that things like ancient spolia, first good moment in the history of recycling, use a part of this building to create another building.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You know, and who knows whether one can actually get, like, humankind to internalize those ethics, but it's going to have to happen.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, or to reframe the idea of mining and processing to deal with things that have already been something.
Right.
You know, it's
Yeah.
not just
Yeah.
digging up.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
And the other aspect of all of this is, I feel as though, and I certainly feel this about your work, but other assemblage artists' work, Elias Sime, Hutopia, the Astor here in Chicago, Anat Sui, and forget where, but people who are, you know, using materials to make new material, or to make new objects. You know, to me, that is always theatricalizing in a good way.
Right.
The capacity for kind of rejuvenation.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, to me,
Yeah.
the sort of another, like, bottom line message is that things can be other than they are, and better than they are. Right?
Mhm.
It's just a matter of taking things apart and putting them back together again.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's also a way in which that idea can be romanticized to the
yes.
You know, like, I think there's a lot of cases in which it takes way more time, energy, and money
Yeah.
to take the thing that's, and, you know, try and rehabilitate it or
Yeah.
turn it into some other thing. But, you know, there's another sense in which, you know, we have like, there's plenty of work to do, and there's plenty of people to do the work. There are plenty
Mhm.
of people that need work, and why can't those things all be
Yeah.
fit together in some way? Like, there's
Right.
there's something about how the economy functions at the moment where all of our time, energy, and processing is going into the sheet of plywood rather than, you know, picking the nails out of this board so we can
Yeah.
use the board again,
Right.
or reuse it.
Which
So-
might be more expensive and might not be more expensive, you know?
Yeah, I think like Germany seems a lot farther
Yes.
along on that front,
Yeah.
or they have things ordered and
Yeah.
procedures set up
Yeah.
for how to deal with all these different materials, and yeah, I think it is a kind of a technological question in a way, or process
Right.
question.
Right, right. I'd love some water.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
here is water
Yeah.
too, yay.
Sorry,
Look at that.
Getting a little parched.
Just a little.
What's your time like?
I'm best if I scoot along around 12:15, 12:20.
Okay.
I don't have any idea what time it is.
It is not even, it's 10 to 12, so we've got a little time still.
Okay, good.
I was thinking it might be nice too to just wander through the huts.
Yeah, I would love to wander through the huts.
Maybe could do that in 5 or 10 minutes. Give us about 15 minutes.
Okay, good. Good.
So tell me more about your assemblage essay.
Okay, I'll tell you more about the assemblage essay, but not without first saying that I aggressively say assemblage rather than assemblage.
Okay. Yeah.
For a couple of reasons. The funny reason being that when Bill Seitz was putting together his Art of Assemblage show, he was in 1961. He was saying assemblage, and then Bruce Conner in California met with Seitz, who came to see him in California, and then Conner said to people after he left, "Oh, Bill Seitz was out here saying assemblage this and assemblage that," right? So in the essay, I actually say assemblage, and then like in parentheses, not assemblage with a few H's after the A. But for me, it has everything to do with the fact that assemblage theory is not not formed from a translation of assemblage in the French, but agencement, as I said, and so I want to make sure that assemblage, pronounced in some sense the most American way one can pronounce that word in English, is able to float on its own, I guess. And do a certain kind of work. The work it's meant to be doing is to say, okay, we have this assemblage theory, which is assemblage, not assemblage, and we have this art practice, and I'm going to call the art practice and the history of that art practice the same thing, not going to say, oh, this is assemblage over here versus assemblage, because it's not not just theory land in which the assemblage theory gets deployed. It really is also in some very good urban geography, for instance. A guy named Colin McFarrell, who works mostly in Mumbai, in particular. There are other folks too, and so I get how important that word, not in its Francophile mode, but just that word and what it means has been powerful in good social sites, clear social sites. And so that's another reason why I want to protect, as it were, not just English but American pronunciation of assemblage. So the overarching question for the project is, does assemblage as an art practice, the history of it and its current practice, have anything to contribute to assemblage theory within the social sciences? And when I think of assemblage theory in the social sciences, I am thinking of people like Colin McFarlane, but other folks too who've been influenced, if not by Deleuze and Guattari, then by Manuel Delanda, who came out, I think, last year with a book called Assemblage Theory. It's a good book, and in a way it's much more clarifying than trying to find assemblage theory within Deleuze and Guattari. So my answer to the question is obviously yes. The arts have a great deal to contribute to this conversation, and then there are stumbling points, I would say. So I mostly am not looking, except gesturally, at the 19th century or the 18th century. So, the question, as I said before, well, what about quilts? What about scrapbooks? What about the history of spolia? I'm really thinking of it as something that you could say begins with Picasso in 1912 with the still life and chair painting. That sort of has its glory moment in Schwitters and then presses on from that. All of that is a retrospective designation of that work as assemblage, because assemblage doesn't really, or now I will say also assemblage, doesn't really enter the art historical or art critical discourse until the 50s, until Dubuffet. And so when Seitz is putting on the Art of Assemblage show at MoMA in '61, it's really he who is retroprojectively saying, oh, I'm going to consider all of this assemblage and make assemblage the master term. And so for me, it is the master term, so that I consider collage a mode of assemblage, and I consider filmic montage a mode of assemblage. And that has been helpful and clarifying to just be blunt about the fact that, yes, this is an anachronistic use of this word, but I think it's helpful. So the biggest problem that I think I face is can be marked with Duchamp, or can be marked with Delanda. At the panel conversation before the opening, or actually at the opening, shortly after the opening, of the Art of Assemblage show at MoMA in '61. There was a panel that included Robert Rauschenberg, it included Duchamp, it included a couple other people as well, Roger Shattuck, and Duchamp famously declared there, every work of art is already made. But he also said, and every work of art is an assemblage. And yeah, it's like, so, yes.
Is this the Roland Barthes idea, more or less? Just the authorship that we're
no, I mean, I think the Barthes idea is a better idea. Duchamp is just being flip and really thinking, so to make a painting, you assemble some paint, a really crude point. Absolutely valid point. But oh my gosh, then we're not going to distinguish between Louise Nevelson and Helen Frankenthaler by saying, oh, Nevelson is an assemblage artist. So there's a reason, why I think we have the word assemblage within art history, and I think it is helpful, although sometimes it's blurry. But Duchamp's claim is not invalid. I mean, I would say that conceptually it's valid. And Manuel Delanda, not ever thinking about art, but will say, all cities are assemblages, and also that all persons are assemblages, and everything has an assemblage character, or not. That's not the way he would put it. Everything is an assemblage. And persons, like cities, like all sorts of other entities, are always disassembling, reassembling, in Deleuze-Guattari speak, territorializing, deterritorializing. And he's primarily interested in social organizations, and he's primarily interested in a way of thinking that Foucault was actually thinking in the governmentality work, which is really about things like, could be the city, or that's a good example, so's the nation state. But if you say, Chicago has decided to close 13 schools. It's like, Chicago has decided to do that? From Delanda's point of view, somewhat intensified by my wording, that really is obscuring everything that is happening by saying Chicago is closing these schools. Right. What were the networks, including also like who were the people that just to call a city, the city did this, is to blind oneself to the assemblage, reassemblage of persons, ideas, flows of capital, politics.
So it's a misplaced agency?
Yeah, right? That's right. And I think ditto, for me it's always easy to think about the university.
Yeah.
somebody says, oh, the university is gentrifying the neighborhood. Well,
Yeah.
I'm a member of the university, but I'm also part of a group that is trying to defend the neighborhood against the university's gentrification, right? So
Yeah.
I am assembled with the university, but I'm also assembled with this group
Right.
and assembled with various other groups. And I think that's what DeLanda is trying to get us to see. The problem, I think, is the same problem that you have with Duchamp, is that, oh, well, if everything always is an assemblage, what sort of analytic conceptual force does assemblage actually have, right? And I think that there are some cities, for instance, Los Angeles, which seem more assemblage-like than Hanover, Massachusetts, than Palo Alto, California, things like that. So,
Forest.
yeah, that's right. That's right. So I think that it's productive to imagine an assemblage ontology, but sort of heuristically. Because otherwise I think everything just gets flattened.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so everything's an assemblage.
Yeah.
So therefore, your work has no specificity on those grounds compared to somebody who's a video artist.
Yeah.
It's like, huh, really? There should be some way of differentiating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And differentiating, with this term, I think.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that I think art is contributing to the conversation is that I think there's also, of course, something like assemblage effects, or the experience of something being assemblage-like, a kind of unresolved heterogeneity, right? Something like that. And I think the best assemblage work is indeed fusing one thing in another, but not by erasing all the seams.
Yeah.
It's like you didn't put this stuff together and then try to make it not look like it's put together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think art, or the art that I care about most, is really helping teach people who want to think about assemblage that there is also the experience of assemblage. It's not just from the compositor's point of view, not just from the point of composition, but also the point of reception.
Yeah.
I think that that's important. Because I also feel as though you could say, I certainly say in this essay, that we live in an assemblage era where all of us sitting at the computer are cutting and pasting all the time. Of course, we're not really cutting and pasting. Those are the happy terms we have for it.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, we're always producing hybrid things. I mean, there's nothing that I am writing that doesn't include something I've cut and pasted from a previous draft of that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If I'm writing a letter for somebody, I look for previous letters that I've written for that person and borrow paragraphs or sentences. But we don't want the seams to show.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like we're reassembling all of the time, but pretending that that's not happening. And I think that art also allows us to begin to think about the difference that exposing the seams might make.
Yeah. And where do you, like I've one of the things I've been writing about Duchamp is the idea that among the many things that some of that work does is you put a thing on a pedestal and now
Mhm.
it's an art object.
Right.
And it sort of democratizes the world of objects in a certain
Right.
way. But it also says, oh shoot, I forgot where I was going with it.
I thought that was going to end with, it democratizes the objects, but it hierarchizes the subjects, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in fact,
Right.
If the artist puts whatever on the pedestal, it gets to be art. But
Yeah.
if, say, I do, chances aren't so good. Or
Right.
if, some group of people decides that it is an art object because I put it there, then that group of people has granted me the status of artist.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
But it's but there tends to be that kind of tension, I think, when one thinks about ready-mades.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I had a thought and it disappeared. So hopefully it'll come back.
Okay.
Well, one of the ways I think I was going to ask you before I had the thought about the assemblage. The importance and necessity of holding on to distinctions, not because they are things in themselves, but because they help us understand what we're dealing with and at what level of resolution we're looking at a problem. Yeah, because it's just you can just as easily say a photograph is just a bunch of spots, and you keep going further in there, and you end up at molecules eventually, which you can call an assemblage too. And but I think levels of resolution is one way to look at the
that would be good. That would be good.
Why they're necessary. So I'm curious too. Like I don't feel like I've pieced together. I sort of avoid talking about my work in weaving too tightly some political set of goals or ambitions. But it has some. When you say cities have an assemblage quality, or in a way it's the opposite of a melting pot, right? It's that the things maintain their distinct quality, even though they are joined.
Exactly.
In some
exactly. Way. But I do feel as though a group of artists who are working on and in the urban fabric the way you do, that it's impossible not to be thinking about the reconfiguration of materials in relation to the reconfiguration of people. I think it's impossible not to. I mean, I think that's one of the problems and one of the privileges of working in and on the urban fabric. And I can imagine people saying, "Oh, that's too easy an allegory." And I can also imagine pushing back and saying, well, nobody's producing an allegory. These are found materials that are being manipulated this way. That's not an allegory. But I also think if somebody not you wants to generate an allegory, fine. Fine. But in some sense, you're doing what you're doing. And you're attracted to this material and this kind of material. And I mean, I think what we want from artists is exactly that, a certain set of impulses that maybe not everybody would have, certain kinds of attractions that not everybody would have, to find out what sort of newness that might bring into the world.
I think one of the ways I talk about the toolkits that an artist comes up into the world with or learns as an art student is to look at things closely. At least that used to be the case.
Right.
To look at, just the physical act, say, of trying to draw an apple sitting on a table or whatever it is, requires, intense concentration, and you realize how complicated the thing on the table is, and how odd it starts to look the closer you look at it, and so that and maybe a willingness to observe things that are maybe look under the rock instead of just the top of it. Turn it over once or twice.
Right. I remember talking to a poet who taught creative writing, who said, well, the thing about creative writing is you can't teach it, but you can teach people how to read. Which is sort of, it's like, you can actually get people to think about language a different way.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and, to, and to, in some sense, in that case too, turn the rock over and see what's on the underneath and not just presume that the rock
Yeah.
is what it is.
Yeah. Do you wanna, should we walk around the huts for a few minutes?
I'd love to walk around
Just,
the huts.
oh, it's 12:10, so
Okay.
don't have much time left.